Thanks for joining us again for the Future Marketing Live series. We're here for the 5th episode tonight, and we're focusing on the PR and comms sector. What I realised when we started putting this together was just the vast variety of different roles that there were within the sector. So whenever we were putting together our contributors for this, we wanted to try and represent that as much as possible. So tonight we've got Katherine McCloskey, who is Customer Engagement and Campaigns Manager with the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. And we've got Deborah King, who is the Managing Director of King Communication. And both have done a variety of roles across a range of different organisations. So hopefully we'll get a good broad view of what careers in the sector can look like. So thanks very much for joining us this evening. Deborah, if we start with you, given that our audience for this are marketing students, so we always like to go back to the start if we can. So you studied a law with politics degree at Queen's, and then your first graduate role was with Stakeholder Communications, who are a pretty well-known agency based here in Belfast. Can you tell us about how that role came about, and after doing the law and politics degree, how you ended up in that agency role?
Well, I think what's important, I suppose, to say to any of the students that are listening tonight is that, you know, the subjects and that you're good at school just may not dictate where you actually end up, because I ended up probably doing law and politics degree because I got bad careers advice, and I know probably a lot of people listening here this evening might find that as well, because I was one of those people at school where I could do most things, but I wasn't your science specialist or your math specialist, so I didn't have a natural fit. So when I went to try and get some careers advice, I remember going to a teacher and I said, you know, what A-level subjects should I do? I was like soul searching at that stage, you know, saying, what should I do here? And they're like, whatever, you'll be grand, you know. And it was really, really difficult then to say, well, where do I go? Where do I go from there? So I think somebody had said to me, a law degree's a good thing to have. I'd never had any burning desire to be a solicitor or to practice law. So when I finished college, I did, like most people probably here, did a graduate scheme, and then I went travelling. And if I could give one piece of advice is go and see the world. Absolutely. Try and do it before you start your career.
It's one thing I didn't do actually, and then actually deliberately sought out a job that was going to give me the opportunity to do it, because I knew loads of people that had, and I felt like I'd missed something.
I think it gives you just a wider experience of the world. Like, and I met some fantastic people. We stayed friends. We've been to people's weddings in England and different places and that. And it just allows you then maybe to settle into a career when you come back. But back to the original question, how I ended up in Stakeholder, I had no idea what PR was. I had no idea, you know, what that type of corporate communications role was. I had seen an ad in the paper that said, Stakeholder Communications working between Newry and Belfast. I lived in Newry. I was happy enough to work in Belfast. It said, that's the one for me. Okay. I'll give that a go. And went down, and the managing director there was from Newry. I obviously said the right things, even though I didn't know exactly what I was letting myself in for at that stage. And I ended up staying there 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. So, I mean, you ended up spending 10 years there. Can you talk us through a little bit about how your role developed over that period of time, and the kind of projects you were involved with the agency?
Well, after I figured out what it actually was and what PR was, I got stuck in very quickly, and I had just a phenomenal time there. I mean, I organised press conferences for the Dalai Lama on his visits to Ireland.
Nice to have on the CV.
I looked after Sainsbury's PR in Northern Ireland. I was TV licensing spokesperson here. We did some work with Children Crossfire, the charity in Derry, up Richard Moore. He's phenomenal. And I ended up going to Tanzania with them. Then later on, my husband and I trekked Peru with them, you know, doing and you know, getting involved in that sort of thing. So it was absolutely amazing, the things I got involved in. I was involved with the MAC from the very start. So from the turn the sod to actually productions in the MAC, we were involved in that. But anybody listening here tonight, what I would say is, if you have the opportunity, get agency experience, because it is sink or swim. It is absolutely, you are stuck in there. You learn core skills that I don't think you learn anywhere else, which is time management and things that maybe stand you better stead. If you're charging for your time rather than actually being salaried, you have to be extremely disciplined about what you do and what you deliver, and also then being able to stand over your time. So being able to stand in front of a client and turn around and say, I spent an hour on this and I'm charging you an hour for it, or, well, you know what, it actually took me 3, but I can recharge you an hour because, and it's getting that into
it's one of the, it's funny, it's because it's always been said about that agency life, and I spent almost 20 years in in-house marketing roles, and then thought it was a good idea to start an agency. And it's, a lot of people say it's probably a younger person's game, and it's certainly, the reality is as it is talked about from my experience. I mean, the pace at which you have to work and deal with the number of clients that you have to deal with. Was that, I mean, with in an agency like Stakeholder as well, I'm sure there's an awful lot of pressure in that environment to perform.
Yeah, I think at one stage I remember counting, I had maybe 16 accounts that some of them I was in the lead on, and some of them, some of them I worked on. But that's even that change in your pace and your mindset and trying to think about those. But what I would say as well is, and I'm very conscious that tonight we're trying to give advice and trying to give people a steer, is I stayed far too long. Because it was easy, it was comfortable. I was at the top of my game in there, but 10 years anywhere is far too long. I wasn't learning after a certain period of time. I was repeating and building, and that's fine. But from your own personal career development, I would say to somebody, I said, get into an agency first if you can, and give yourself 5 years. And say, max, I'm gonna give myself,
And what are the most important skills then? I mean, you touched on some of them probably, and people can probably take from what you've said a few of them. But what would you say are the most important skills that you'll need to have in that agency environment?
For me, it's funny because I didn't come from a marketing background, but what I would absolutely say is pestle. If you think of, that outer worldly experience, like I used to, because I travelled from Newry, I used to listen to the news the whole way down the road in the morning, so I knew what was shaping the news agenda. And I'm sure you won't mind me mentioning, but Gary MacDonald from the Irish News, I remember him saying to me one time, why do people ring me while the budget's on? Do they not understand that this is like this is the icing on the cake? This is like my piece de resistance of the year, of actually listening to the budget, and a lot of people don't see that. I remember, and I've told this story to people recently at a course that I was taking. I said that I was working on this campaign for Sainsbury's, and I had it all lined up and it was ready to go. And I came into work that morning and I was just buzzing. This was just going to be the best campaign I ever. Walked in through the door, and the next thing, newsflash, the Pope had died. I was like, are you for real? Because I knew then I was not getting any column inches, and it was column inches rather than digital hits at that stage. But I knew then that my campaign was dead in the water. It just wasn't happening, and you had to be agile enough to repackage that again. But if you didn't have that political, economic, social, the astuteness as to what was going on around you, you might have put that out and it flopped for the client because they couldn't figure out where it was going. So the biggest piece of advice I would say is, while it might seem like a drag if you're studying that type of thing, when you actually put it into context, it's really, really, really useful. Just know what's going on in the world and be aware.
I think it's something that even in our own personal lives, I think, work lives, sometimes you can get so bogged down with what's happening at your desk and on the day. And the days, I went down to Dublin with a couple of our customers actually to a manufacturing and supply chain exhibition in the RDS on Tuesday. And, part of me that was thinking the day before, I really don't have time for this. I've got 97 other things I could be doing tomorrow. But going down 2 hours in the train, conversations about what we were going to do next, what was happening, out talking to people about what was going on in different areas, you come back just with this new sense of energy, and then because you've got new ideas and new things coming at you all the time because of that exposure. So I think it is just keep the head up and make sure you pay attention to what's going on around you. Yeah,
it's not rocket science. You know what I mean? None of us are doing brain surgery. So the way I look at it is it's being sharp enough, and it's questioning. I'd say never assume. In communications, you can't assume. Ever assume. Just always say, I'm just going to check that. And things like, when you're proofreading, I'd always say, never assume. Is that phone number correct? people say, I didn't check it. And you say, but it's the silly little things that can catch
it's attention to detail. There was one of the guys we've had on a couple of the episodes, a guy called Jamie Gordon, who's a marketing graduate from last year, and I remember meeting him for a coffee about 3 or 4 months after he graduated, and he was in his first graduate role, and saying to me, what's the biggest thing you've noticed, you've learned since you went into work? He says, I never realised how important attention to detail was. Until you get into that environment, and you have to, is everything there, making sure there's been plenty of eyes on something before you go and do anything.
That's what I talk about. Always have a couple of sets of eyes and things, because you can't spot your own mistakes.
No.
You don't see them. So if you have written the piece, never proof it. Always get somebody else to have a look at, especially if you're sending it to print. That that Absolutely. You actually know that it has been properly checked. And we'll all make mistakes, but.
If we could move on to you then, Catherine, I mean, your career sort of started similarly to Deborah's, I suppose, with a politics degree.
Yep.
Followed by, this is going to take me a while to read this, by the way, when I was reading through all this. A politics degree, followed by a master's in law, then postgraduate research into political communications, then another MSc in public affairs and political lobbying, and then your first graduate role was with the NI Federation of Housing Associations as policy and comms officer. So what was it? What did that role involve, and why did it appeal to you then?
I suppose first and foremost, I think we probably had the same career advice, considering that we ended up doing very similar courses in university. And I think that kind of goes to the wider point that you're talking about, just of being aware of what's going on around you. For me, I know that list is quite extensive there, but actually I'd started working straight after my master's in law.
Okay.
So I was kind of doing a bit of both at the same time. The job with the Federation of Housing Associations was actually an internship to start off with.
Okay.
Something that I would absolutely recommend. I was really fortunate that it was also a paid internship, and I think that's something that's really, really important for employers to be thinking about as well. For me, as you can see, I've been in education quite a long time. I still am, I have to say, much to everybody else's dismay. Mm-hmm. But I really felt it was time for me to go out and actually get some on-the-job experience, and that was crucial for me. I could sit in the library with books around me, but really getting out there and getting stuck in was incredibly important to me. Again, I didn't really know what policy, communications, PR was all about, and I have to be totally honest, I think at the ripe old age of 34, I still don't know what I want to do, and I don't think anybody really knows. Interestingly, I know loads of people who've also had a very similar background to what we have had, and seem to end up in this field of work. So someone should really do a piece of research on that. I think that's a good dissertation topic if anybody is doing that at the minute. For me, it's solely about people, and my career has always been focused around people and communicating with people in different ways. So with the Federation of Housing Associations, it was really a membership organisation, and that was huge for me because it was looking at policy, it was looking at public affairs, it was looking at communication, it was looking at borderline moving into digital because it was still kind of very new at that stage. And I think the organisation wasn't really sure what to do there or how that would look in the future. But in terms of the experience, I mean, I'd spent a lot of my time in the not-for-profit sector. And again, it's another great way to learn about a lot of things very quickly. I was totally on my own working in that team. I continued to work on my own for a very long time, but you soon learn the skills to do lots of different things, and I think that's really important. I suppose the piece of advice I would say that comes from that is that by doing lots of things, and I imagine it's the same when you're an agency because you're covering press, you're covering events, you're doing all sorts of things, that you also realise what you like and what you don't like, what you're good at and what you're not good at, and you're never going to be good at everything, and I think that's really important. Looking later on down in my career, actually, I probably refined it even more based on my experiences there. I was so fortunate that it was a small organisation, so I got to be around the table when there were really important meetings happening, and that was something that I would encourage people to say, can I sit in, can I listen, tell me more about, and that's maybe a confidence thing. I think as you get a bit older, you're quite happy to put your hand up and ask questions about things. At that point in time, did I feel like I could? Maybe not, but I was just really fortunate to have great leaders there as well.
I think a lot of that depends on the kind of organisation you're in. I mean, I always want. I mean, you mentioned about your education there. I mean, for me, it just demonstrates a desire to keep learning, which I don't think, I mean, I'm the ripe old age of 47 in January, and I've just completed a course at the QUB, at the Clinton Leadership place, and if I look back over my career, to every couple of years, like I need to go back to school here and do something, and it might not be a formal degree or a master's or something, but it's some sort of course to move yourself on, and I think particularly with how fast things are moving. I mean, in PR and comms, but everywhere, there's got to be a requirement now that lifelong learning is just essential now, because I do a bit of work with Young Enterprise, and we did the digital skills masterclasses. And Barbara Edgar stood up in front of one of the schools that we were presenting at a couple of years ago and said, here's the top 10 jobs in the UK last year, and 7 of them didn't exist 5 years ago. Wow. So how can you train people for jobs when they don't exist yet?
So true. Yeah.
So, you've got just this acceptance that you're going to have to keep learning. It's not a case of you finish your degree, you go and get a job, and that's you done with school. Your roles will change and move, and there's a requirement for you to keep learning. I mean, that's something that you've both done, I think, as part of your careers, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said there about the time you were discussing about staying in a role. I mean, I personally haven't stayed in roles for extensive periods of time, purely just for different reasons, personal reasons, but also I want to try something new. I mean, my current role is very comms focused. I don't have any of the policy, public affairs stuff that I did at the start of my career. And I think that's important. And there's so many new things at the minute. It's hard to keep on top of it. I think also, just given the nature of how we work now, we need to be around people who are also working in similar fields. I mean, I'd said I'd worked on my own in so many organisations doing all of those things, the policy, the communications, the public affairs, and you need to get an opportunity to be sitting around meeting with other like-minded people who are working in your industry. I'm sure you're the same at the minute, in the work that you're doing. It's not very often you get to sit around a table and talk like this about your work. People aren't interested. They're doing their own things and have their own priorities, but they will be interested when they need people like us to be helping out with things.
I mean, it's clear even at this early stage of the conversation that within PR and comms there are just so many different kinds of roles that you can go into, from membership organisations to third sector to public sector to private sector. Do you think enough's done with students to help them understand the variety that is available and the kind of different roles that there are available to them?
No, not at all. I honestly, I think the issue is it's maybe very difficult for a careers teacher, because you don't go to qualify and be a careers teacher. I think there needs to be more interaction between business and academia, and you'll see the regional colleges are doing that and starting to do that. The higher level apprenticeships are great, because they're actually trying to link business and industry. And I'm mentoring a guy at the minute who is 4 days a week in with one of my clients and 1 day in college, and he's able to take then what he's learned in college back into the organisation, implement that, able to take what he's doing in the organisation into college and use it as his case studies. Whereas I went through 3 years of a law and politics degree, and I never seen the inside of a courtroom. Heck, I don't know about you, Catherine. So it's
well, I mean,
I
complete
difficult.
the set here in some senses that I had terrible careers advice too, and it's actually a recurring theme. There was the one difference across the series, but the one difference between our careers advice is, whereas you two were obviously smart enough to go and do law, my careers advice was, you're not smart enough to do law, so pick something you like.
And you see, that is shocking, absolutely shocking.
But I mean, I don't want to get into the whole conversation about the structure of the education system in Northern Ireland here, but I've got a son who's first year at Salford University and just finished his education in a local grammar school that shall remain nameless, and it's not exclusive to that grammar school. But what I see from the work I'm doing in Young Enterprise and the focus of grammar school seems to still be law, accountancy, pharmacy, medicine, or pick something you like.
It's league tables. It's league tables rather than, and I suppose what you're trying to, what I don't think comes across in school is that you're actually learning this, one, to be able to survive in life, but, you know, two, to get a career, not to get a course, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
and thinking about, when you think about those jobs that haven't been created yet, well, if you think of what are the skills that are, you know, it's coding, it's, you know, it's business studies, it's an understanding of how to set up and run a
Well,
business.
it's things like agility and resilience
Yeah.
now as
Yeah.
important, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because, like I said, if the job that you're going to have in
Well-being,
5 years doesn't exist yet, you better be able to adapt quickly.
Yeah, and rather than learning, you know, Pythagoras theorem, you know, learning how to put together a P&L, like, in reality would be, you know, I remember having a guy coming in to do work experience with me, and he had gone through, I think, a marketing degree and all those things, and he'll know if he's listening in, because he'll be a cringe, he's going to mention me, but he didn't know how to track changes in a document. And I was like, what did they teach you in that degree? You know, what did they teach you in that marketing degree? Because what I'm thinking people are missing is the basic
Practical on the
skills,
job.
the practicalities. And for example, you know, if you want to work in communications, if you want to work in anything other than our in-house, you need to know that your time is your asset, and you need to know how to value that time and how to actually charge for that time. And if you're not taught that, and if you haven't had that experience, like you haven't said, it's very difficult.
Is there? I mean, I'm not sure where I stand on some of those arguments, because I do think that there are things that you're only ever going to learn when you're working.
But if you think, right, just on that point, right, I have, you know, people would come to me and say, oh, will you write this for me, or will you do this, that, and that for me, right? And that's fine. But would you ask an electrician to come to your house and fix your lights and not ask how much it was going to be? So, do you know, people in our type of industries, you know, that you're actually, I suppose it's thinking and creative, and you know, you don't have a tangible asset.
Yeah.
You have to be strong and resilient enough to turn around and say, do you know, that's actually my job. So
No, I 100%
that will
agree
be,
with
you know,
on that,
so I'm sure
100%.
people ask you to, you know, will you make a wee video for
it's
me?
it's actually part of the reason why, whenever I decided I wanted to do something myself, that I chose video, because it was the most tangible thing.
Yeah.
And it was a transaction, and it was like, you know, there is
You're
a it's a
handing
digital
something over.
product, but
Yeah.
it's a product, and once you've got it, and you're not getting any more.
Yeah.
Unless you pay for more. And I think there is a horrible tendency with the consultancy world, or with the agency world, or with, you know, any sort of creative things, to say just keep going. And by the way, there's no more money.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong. I mean, it goes back to your point about paid and unpaid internships. I mean, I could talk for I could get on my soapbox about unpaid internships if you really want me to. I mean, I think they're just wrong as far as I'm concerned, and they're putting they're creating opportunities for people in a very privileged position, who can afford to work for nothing. And there's a great line I heard once. I think it was the guy who founded WordPress, said, "Talent is distributed equally, but opportunity isn't." And by virtue of not paying somebody for their internship, you are immediately excluding some extremely talented people on the basis that they can't afford to work for nothing because of their personal circumstances or family circumstances. So we're diverging a little bit here, but
I think just to add to that though as well, I mean, the best experience I got for my career actually had nothing to do with PR and comms. It was working in hospitality.
right?
And I worked in hospitality from I was the ripe old age of 14. And that taught me so much about resilience, about dealing with people, having awkward, difficult conversations. And I use some of those skills more now than I did the skills in the early part of my professional career.
Okay.
Definitely, it was an eye-opener for me. And it's the same with the travel thing as well. I think there's so much more you learn in life, and really schools should be teaching people at a really early age how to manage all those things, how to have conversation with people. In another world, I actually taught in Queen's as well, and the thing I noticed when students were coming in first year was they didn't really know how to just speak for themselves. I mean, I saw a lot of tops of people's heads and things for the first year, and it was people just didn't feel confident or comfortable enough having a conversation about their opinions or their thoughts. Or it's a very strange environment, the educational system that we have been through ourselves. I mean, opportunity came and education came for us, and that to me is a privilege. That's a real luxury. But for a lot of people that doesn't happen. And I think there's a real onus on us to try and ensure that we have people who are able to go into the workforce with the skills that they need just to get through life. I mean, it can be incredibly difficult, but I said most of my experience now dealing with people and dealing with very senior people and managing ego and managing just personalities as well has come from work that I did before I even thought about what I want to be when I grow up. And I think that's really important.
We heard from Deborah a little bit, Catherine, about the kind of skills involved in the agency role. If we go back to your experience with the Federation of Housing Associations, what would you say were the key sort of skills that you needed to succeed in that role?
I think with all roles that I've worked in, planning and organisation has been key. I mean, you can have degrees coming out your ears, but if you're not organised or you don't know what you're doing, then that's really incredibly difficult. The other thing I would say is the likelihood is that you won't be able to control some of the things that land on your desk, and you may also get things that you think, oh, this is far too much. And I would say it's really important to surround yourself with people who are highly skilled at what they do, and that's critical. The difficulty I found really was managing my time, because there was a lot expected of me individually. At the same time, it was really, really exciting because I was getting the opportunity to meet people and to have influence in a way that I had never expected before as well. Again, it was an opportunity for me to work out where I maybe had my strengths and weaknesses as well, and what maybe I wanted to do a wee bit more of in terms of going down different routes and different paths. But yeah, I mean, as I said, I was very fortunate. It was a small team, and that was really useful for me to be able to get access to people in a way that I probably wouldn't have if I'd have gone into an organisation the size I'm in now.
So moving on from your role with Stakeholder, Deborah, then you ended up, you went to in-house then after that with Norbrook Labs then as communications manager. So why the move? You touched on it a little bit earlier, but why the move from the agency role to the in-house role?
It was very personal. I had just had my first daughter, and just I was done with the commute to Belfast, and Norbrook was obviously local. And I suppose I said, let's try something a bit closer to home. Norbrook's a fabulous business, an absolutely fabulous organisation. Met some brilliant people there from, the worldwide sales team, some of whom I'm, still very friendly with, to the guys on the floor. Like, used to, sit and have the crack with the guys in the workshop and on the warehouse and stuff, which was absolutely brilliant, and it was great. And I suppose I had never worked in that corporate environment before, and the big thing for me was just getting under the bonnet, and actually really understanding all the different other elements of the business, which like I learned so much in Norbrook, because when you're an agency, while you're really, really busy, you're only touching on like little elements of the business, the little elements that you want you to see and want you to promote. Whereas Norbrook was totally different. It was across everything from, pharmacovigilance to new product development, all these things. But the interesting thing about that was within the organisation, I had zero impact. And I think it's really, really important for people to know that even if you like a company and I suppose, you understand what it's trying to do and you get it, sometimes they just don't get you, and sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it doesn't gel. And I suppose at that stage as well, then I had only, and this is an interesting one probably for some of our female listeners tonight, I had only just joined when I found out that I was expecting my second daughter, and just immediately put me on the back foot in terms of, and not that anybody ever said it was for me. I think because I think immediately I was like, this is terrible. I'm only into a new role, and I'm going to be going on maternity leave before I've actually got my. It's awful. You know,
I mean, does that? I mean, you know, I have obviously, haven't experienced this, but is that still? I mean, is that still a thing?
Yes, especially when you're not in an organisation long enough to even get maternity pay. You know, so you've got this fabulous job that, you know, pays, you know, really, really well, and yet and all, for 6 months you're going to get £130 a week or something to the effect, you know. So it was a really strange time for me, and really something that I battled hard with, because I loved it and I really wanted to make a difference in it, but I couldn't.
It's funny, it goes back to the last stream we did actually a couple of weeks ago. It was on the arts sector, and we had Michelle Baird from Ulster Orchestra, and she was going through her career path as well, and she was saying there was one particular opportunity that I won't mention it, but there was one particular opportunity that job role that she ended up in, and it wasn't right. The organisation wasn't right for her, and she knew pretty quickly that the organisation wasn't right for her, but she made a decision that she didn't want to be seen to be jumping too soon, so decided she was going to stick it for 2 years and then leave, because she was worried about what impression it would create if there was a particularly short stint that, you know, potential employers might look at that and think not really willing to stick around when the going gets tough potentially. And, you know, it's terrible that people make those assumptions, but that's a fact. And this goes back to your earlier point about, I'm 47 now, and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I think there is a tendency for us all, as parents probably as well, to be trying to put too much pressure on our kids from too young to have their shit together and, you know, and have it all mapped out. And you get bumps in the road sometimes, and you just have to react. And it'll take you different places.
I think it's a little bit what Catherine said there as well too, though, is, you know, probably up until that point, you know, you've seen, I've maybe lived in a little bubble of everything being, you know, fantastic, and, you know, I was good at everything that I turned my hand to, and I could, you know, not that I was excelling at anything, but I could do, you know, most of the things, and this was a nut that I just couldn't crack. And, like, you know, it's nothing to do with the company, it's nothing to do with the, you know, it was just me, and that did not gel, and it has such an impact on your self-confidence, and you know, and at some stage then you have to say, I have to remove myself from this, you know, from this, and but it's hard, and it's
I had exactly the same experience. I was in CDE for 10 years and was traveling the world. We had a 11 or 12 person marketing team. We were doing brilliant stuff, and I really loved working with the people I loved working with. But in the last couple of years, when I started being really honest with myself, I wasn't getting out of it what I needed to get out of it. I just had to decide to just say, you know what, much as I really like the company, similar to your Norbert, really like the company, love the people I'm working with, I'm getting all these great opportunities, but it's time for something else. And like you said, it does, even at that stage, you know, at what age was I? I was 40ish at that stage. That, you know, even at that stage, you think surely you've got enough career history for that not to hit your self-confidence at that age. It doesn't matter what age it happens to you. It's tough to get back up again from that.
And I suppose for me, what I did was I went and applied for a job and got it, and it was back to traveling in Belfast, and it just, my heart wasn't in it, but I knew from my own mental health perspective, I was like, you know, I need to move on and do something different here. And then got chatting to the guys in MJM and said I was moving, and they were like, well, don't just yet. And they weren't quite ready for the role probably that I was to go into, but just the way the time happened, and it meant a case of me going 1 minute down the road compared to back to driving. You know,
we'll come back to the MJM experience in a second. I want to move on to you, Catherine. So after, as well as the Federation of Housing Associations, you worked at Queen's in 2 different roles for a while there as comms officer and disability services support provider. So could you tell us a wee bit about what those roles were and what was working in the education sector like, particularly in an organisation the size of Queen's?
Absolutely. I suppose Queen's was a big shock for me, going from like smaller organisations and then going into this huge institution that was so well known. The beauty about the information and comms role that I had there was that I was actually a student, and that team was primarily all students, which was really interesting. And I have to say, looking back now, the person who managed us and set up that team was probably more innovative than I ever thought at the time. And we had worked primarily in the international and postgraduate student centre. So our whole team were either international, postgrad students, or both.
Okay.
And it was really about promoting the services for those groups of people. So looking back now, I was like, what a smart move. Actually putting the people around the table who you want to connect with was the best thing that we could have done. I mean, at the time, I didn't even realise that. It's looking back now that I manage teams and I think, wow, you know, I might do that myself in the future. So that was really exciting. Again, really, it was a brand new team, new concept, new element in Queen's. There's a huge, obviously, desire there to attract international students, to attract people to do postgraduate research. So in some ways, we were really lucky that we had a lot of resources to do things, but we had freedom to do lots of different things and try out new concepts, new ideas. It was just a really exciting time to be there. I suppose being a student at the time, it was really exciting for me as well, because I got to try things out and test things too. But that for me is something that I've sort of carried on throughout my career. For me, the most important thing is, you know, who are you talking to? What about the actual people who you're trying to influence, impact, speak on behalf of? And that was really formative for me, just to work out, do you know what, actually it's about the people and sometimes not about the numbers and about all those things. So that was incredibly exciting. I spent a fair bit of time there. I think my other role as a disability services support provider was slightly off the comms side of things, but it also taught me a lot about diversity and the importance of how people like to be communicated with. So basically the role was that I was assigned different students who had different needs and requirements, from note taking to going to the library to all sorts of stuff. And that really gave me an insight, and I use some of the things that I learned there today about how people absorb information, what suits people, just different ways people want to be interacted with and communicated with. And that was probably one of the most invaluable experiences I've had, to really think about, I'm not my audience, there's a whole bunch of other people out there who are, and that was critical. But yeah, it was a really exciting time. It was almost like a really nice experiment where you could go and do a lot of different things. That's and try things out.
And that might surprise people. People might think, you know, you go into a big organisation like Queen's and it's all very structured and you don't really get much room to manoeuvre. But I mean, it sounds like from your experience that wasn't the case at all. I
think that was really great leadership, I have to say. And as I said, I didn't appreciate it at the time. I didn't appreciate the fact that we could go off and do all these things. But there was also a sense that we were being valued for our opinion as well. And I think later on in my career, when I managed people, it was something that was really crucial for me, to think, right, well, that's all great that I can manage a process and whatever, but you know, what are the people in the team thinking about this, and what skills do they have to bring to the table? And I met some amazing people there as well, and I don't even think we realised we were doing information in comms, because it was good crack, it was good fun as well, and that's all part of it too. I mean, you said the worst careers advice you ever got was, you know, but do something you're good at, or do something you like.
It was actually really good advice.
Yeah. That is. Fair, I mean, my positive spin on that is, do you know what? Don't do what everyone tells you should do. Yeah. Go and do whatever you enjoy, because at the end of the day, you could be sitting in an organisation for years and you need to make a decision based on your lifestyle and what is going on. Life changes everything.
I have friends I went to university with who chose certain jobs who, when now the odd time you see them at Christmas, pre-COVID, you know, when you would have got together a couple of times a year, whenever you asked them how's work going, their answer was always, oh, it's only 17 years now till I retire. And you're like, oh God,
so
no, I cannot thankfully I've never been in a job like that, but I cannot imagine, you know, you spend most of your life at work.
I think the luxury we have in this industry is that you can change what you
Because
do all
everything's
of
transferable.
the time. You can move around. There's so many opportunities out there to do your own thing, to go and join really diverse teams, and that lifelong learning thing is absolutely critical. It's not that you go and study something for X amount of years and do a bit of training and that's you on your way. You can't do that in this industry, but that's the beauty of it. It's never boring, and I think that's really important.
I mean, one of the recurring themes, if we look at your career path, is social justice seems to be a bit of a recurrent theme among what you've done. Has that always been something that's been important to you? And at what sort of age were you when you realised that, or did you just, was it like a magnetic attraction towards these things that seemed to be about making sure everyone was okay?
Do you know what? I think in Northern Ireland we have a love-hate relationship with politics and the news, and I would say growing up subconsciously I just absorbed some of that as well. I think it probably ties back to doing a degree in politics and going to do law. They weren't necessarily careers that I wanted to go into, but I knew they would have some sort of influence in what I wanted to do. Looking back at my experience in the third sector, I worked for Citizens Advice for a couple of years, and then I also worked for NIACRO, so in the criminal social justice side of things. And for me, it was about, it's different to what I do now, in that I was actually working for people who couldn't communicate what they needed to people who like to make things very complicated, to put it in that sense of the word. And lots of people don't have the opportunity to have a voice, and I thought it was really important to be able to do that in what I do. I probably do the reverse of that now, working in the public sector, where I take really complex, complicated information and give it to the people who need it. So I feel like I've always been that person in the middle, having that two-way conversation between people. But for me, I just saw so many people who weren't able to get their point across or articulate what they needed for loads of different reasons, and I was able to do that. And I just think, why not? It gave me job satisfaction, and it helped people, and what a great thing
back
to do.
to just find the thing that you're good at, find the thing you enjoy doing, and then find the opportunities to keep doing it. Okay. After Norbrook, you touched on it there, where you continued in-house with Group Head of Marketing and Comms with MJM Marine. That sounds like a broader role than the roles you'd had, the comms role that you'd had previously in Norbrook, and obviously the agency role was mainly PR and comms focused. Was that the case?
Yeah, as I say, I learned a huge amount about the corporate world in Norbrook, and it was fabulous to get that, I suppose, complete overview of strategy and I suppose in vision, mission, values, and things that touched on a bit in agency, but you maybe don't get stuck into. So the group head role, I just had an absolute ball in MJM, because it was my van, Top Class, MJM Marine, and then there was a whole property. There was a whole property side then as well. And my preference was the property, because I've always enjoyed planning, and I suppose then we got involved in the Heathrow Logistics Hub, and obviously then starting to write tenders and presentations and doing that for that's top league sort of stuff in terms of pursuing that type of you're dealing with TEO level there in terms of organising that sort of thing. And then on the other side of it, organising with one other person on my team, organising a 2-night cruise for 500 people to the Isle of Man, which included the alumni of the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. So not dealing with people who
dealing with people with expectations.
Dealing with people with expectations. And over the course of 5 days, it was to celebrate the first ship of its size coming in to get a refit in Belfast. So it's huge. And over the course of, I think it was 5 days, including those 2 nights, those 3 nights away, we had, I think, about 800 people through the ship, and the two of us would have, a little bit of help manage that from start to finish, and you can't get better than that type of thing. I suppose then pre-COVID, just I think it was maybe the November, December time, started to think, where have I, what else can I bring here to the table? Because I had learned from stakeholder in terms of not staying too long. I'm probably taken up on I was learning as I got older that, you know, maybe 3 years somewhere is quite enough. And I had seen a role probably around December time that had come up, and I was a really senior role in the NIO. I was never going to get it, but I just said I'll go for it, because then in my mindset I'm on that path and I've made that decision. And I probably haven't told many people that I actually had went for something around them, but just in my head I was thinking.
No, I found myself doing the same actually when I was about to leave. I was starting to go for things that you know you didn't have any chance of, but it was just to start the process off and get yourself into that mindset.
Start the process into that mindset,
knowing that you were probably going to have to do 4 rubbish interviews before you did a good one anyway.
And I didn't want to get to a stage where I was becoming repetitive, you know, and just thinking, going, you know, can I bring anything else here to, you know, to the table? And that would have been me coming on to 3 years then at that stage. So the next thing then, we were, I think it was like the 16th of March, I was talking at the launch of the Irish News Awards and talking about, you know, how literally MJM Group was untouchable, because we were just flying, couldn't get any bigger, couldn't get any better. And the next day then just COVID seemed to hit with a bang, and I don't think any amount of crisis comms planning. Well, it could have even anticipated the impact that it would have on the cruise industry. You know, the cruise industry for the first 6 months just was at the epicenter of everything, you know, and all it seemed to be was, you know, focusing on the news around it being on cruise ships and impacting cruise ships, and then just contract after contract, you know, was getting cancelled, and these are like multi-million pound contracts. And, you know, it just very quickly focused for me that I was extremely selfish about it in some respects, because I turned around and said that, you know, regardless of what happens here, would look different for me afterwards, you know, because the organisation is going to be in recovery mode for a long time. And, you know, I spoke to you know, the family and the guys in there, and it was like, well, you know, maybe this is my opportunity to do what I've probably always wanted to do, but I could never get over that hurdle. And I suppose for anybody listening here who's maybe at the mid-stage of their career and thinking they'd like to do their own thing, it's this idea of how you finish a job on a Monday and start to work for yourself, or finish a job on a Friday and start to work for yourself on a Monday. Just I don't have the cojones, if it's right, for that. You know what I mean? It just
I did. You see, I mean, I had no reason to leave. I had absolutely no reason to leave. My wife still maintains it was a midlife crisis.
Right.
All it was missing, because we had our third child the November before I left, and then I quit my job, and she was just waiting for the sports car to turn up outside of it.
Or the Harley Davidson. You know, and for me then, the fact that, you know, the guys in MJM were very supportive, and there was the furlough opportunity there, and obviously with furlough, you know, we checked it out and you could technically have a second job, and I was like, well, it's not actually a second job, but it's just the researching and setting up and going.
Absolutely.
And
it takes time,
you know, and taking time and actually taking those few months to really work out then, how do I take the best of each element? So how do I take the discipline that I had in agency, take, you know, the corporate learning and strategy side that I had in Norbrook, and take then, I suppose, just the depth and breadth of what I was doing in MJM, and convert it into something, as you said, that I would enjoy and that I would like. And I very quickly decided I don't want an agency, because I don't want to not get onto the bonnet, which is why I went down the consultancy route. And I have this rule, and if any of my clients are listening, they'll laugh. But I said, if I need to see myself as an extension of the senior management team, because I can only answer in to the person who's making the decisions, because middlemen don't work for me. It just doesn't. It just has never worked for me, because I'm just maybe not a good people management, you know, person, but it just
no, I know what you mean.
Do you know where I'm coming from in terms
I know what
of,
you mean.
And I think people need to work out as well, the people listening in, you know what I mean, what works for you. Some people love having a chain of command and people to, you know, answer into this person who answers into the next person who answers into the next person, and it filters through, and they maybe never meet the decision maker. And some people love that, whereas that just doesn't work for me.
No.
And my little rule in King Communication is that if I don't feel comfortable getting into your organisation and making myself a cup of tea, I won't work with you.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
So
I like that.
So
That
it's
is good.
just that idea is
yeah.
if I don't feel so ingrained as part of the team, and if anyone's listening, they'll be saying, half the time she makes us make it, but I still, as long as I felt comfortable making it, I don't necessarily always do it.
It's an interesting.
It's just a little thing that I have in the back of my head, and it also then allows you to be just that wee bit more.
Because in order for you to do, I mean, we find it as well with the video stuff. In order for you to do your best work, you need access to information, and we ask lots of questions of people sometimes, and there are sometimes people say, "I'm not prepared to tell you that," and that's fine. That there's confidentiality and all that stuff, but all we're trying to do is drill down as far as we can go to understand what is driving a decision or what the ultimate objective is, because that gives us the best ingredients for the cake, if you like, then, and we can probably produce the most edible thing when it comes around to making.
My core clients tell me everything, involve me in absolutely everything. Things that aren't perhaps relevant to comms, but somewhere along the line that could shape where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But that takes confidence and that years of experience and the background they've had. I couldn't have done that. Like, you wouldn't have done that in your 20s, because I would have went in and I would have been dipping in and saying, that's okay, I don't need, you know what I mean, I only need to know what I need to know. Whereas now, I don't accept that.
Do you think that it's sort of diverging a wee bit here, but do you think that the experience during COVID has reduced our ability to discover those things happening within the organisations that we work in, as well as with the customers, that we used to just find out when you were having a coffee with somebody, when you were just having a chat in the corridor with someone, and someone would say something, you're like, hold on a second, tell me a wee bit more about that, and then you're off down and there's another idea coming. And now we're all remote mostly. Do you think we're missing that? Those chance encounters that lead to, I think I've had an idea.
100%. For me, I had a real culture shock going into an organisation the size that I'm in now, being the only person in the comms PR team and having access to the chief executive by walking up the stairs and just opening the door. So for me, going into a massive organisation, it was a huge shock to me that there were so many departments. There was a huge chain. And you need to be in to understand that as well. I think it took me almost a year to get my head around how the organisation worked. I would say I still don't know sometimes, but hopefully nobody from work's listening. But I've now been at home longer than I have been in the office. And there are people I still haven't met. And it's very difficult to have a relationship with different people, because in some ways I see my role now as almost like a client within... I see the teams within the housing executive as clients of mine. What is it you need me to do for you? And how can I do it? And I can only really get some of that information sitting in person with them. Also, for me, just the huge thing that is missing now is that I can't turn around to you on a video call and say, here, well, what's the story with you? Tell me a bit about X, Y, and Z. I heard such and such retired, and this happened, and that happened.
It was one of the things I noticed. I wonder
who's in that team now, and you just don't get that. Like, sometimes you could be in a situation where someone has moved on, and I don't know when I'm looking for the wrong person. So you absolutely lose some of that value there. Yeah,
it was one of the things that was talked about quite early in lockdown, was about how people saying, isn't it great that the meetings are shorter because people aren't doing any of that, let's talk about the football last night or what you get up to with the kids at the weekend or whatever. And it's like, but this is where you actually start to understand the personalities that you're dealing with around the table, and make those connections with them, and finding those things. Oh, you like that band too, or you went on holiday there as well, or your kids go to this school, or and those human interactions make us more comfortable with the people we're around, and therefore allow more open and honest conversations to happen.
You also work out how people like to work, if that makes sense. So I went from being on my own, being the graphic designer, being the social media person, being the website person, being everything, and not being really good at any of them, to being more specialist, but actually having a team of people around me who were specialists in what they do. But within their roles, they all work completely differently as well. Some people are, you go up to them first thing in the morning and they've had their coffee and they're good to go. And that's the time I go and approach them about X, Y, and Z. Other people are completely different and that's not how they like to work. But you lose all of that. You lose that connection with people that's really important. I mean, it got to the point where I knew, like, when people went for a coffee break or when somebody was out the front having a smoke who was probably really busy and didn't have time to answer my phone call, but I could nip down the stairs and say, do you know that thing I sent you? Happy for me to go with that? You don't get any of that anymore. And I think everything is much more difficult to kind of just talk through stuff. I mean, a lot of what we do is creative. Yeah. And like, I still have a pen and I draw while I'm talking to people.
You want to see the doodles.
Well, I mean, it's only when someone's doing that at the table beside me that I go, I quite like the way that looks. And do you know what? And it just sparks a conversation. I also think people on a video call are less likely to put ideas out there. And that's just my experience.
That's because you can't read. I know I've done virtual presentations for Ulster University and for customers. Obviously, we're doing video calls to kick off projects and things, and you can't read the room. When you're standing there in front of a room, whether it's a presentation to an event or whether it's a kick-off meeting with a client, and you're running through a few PowerPoint slides or you're running through a few whatever it might be, and you get to the point whenever you're doing it on your laptop and you think, right, nobody's getting this, so I'm going to move on a few here. Whenever you're doing it virtually, you can't do that. So you just keep going, and everybody at the other end is thinking, what is he talking about?
Everybody listening to us could be sleeping at this stage.
I know, because you just can't read the room, and it's so important.
You can't. And body language is so important.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, Catherine, was your third sector experience. So you talked about NIACRO, and you were also a board trustee with Aware, the mental health charity, as well, after a stint with Citizens Advice. I'd imagine they're fairly challenging organisations to work in, just because of the nature of the work that you're doing. I mean, you're talking about real human impact stories here, that you're having to communicate and deal with sensitively from a comms capacity.
Absolutely. Just given the nature of some of those roles, you can imagine. I mean, we haven't really touched on sort of like press and media stuff. Some people really love that. Some people really don't love it. I was sort of thrown into the deep end with a lot of that. Really, a lot of people wanted to tell their stories, and maybe it wasn't appropriate for them to tell stories. My phone would have just been constantly ringing with newspapers wanting to do a story about X, Y, and Z. And it kind of broke into two sections for me. There was the people public interest side of things, where it was always like a phone call at 4 o'clock from even an extra, can you have somebody come on and talk about this new thing that's changed and how it's going to impact their life, and you have to turn around and say, no, actually that's not possible. And it's about protecting people too. I mean, it might be really great for the chief executive to go, yes, we were on primetime radio, that's excellent, but is that actually the purpose of what you're doing? I don't know. The other side of the stuff was the crisis side of things, where things were breaking in the newspaper on a Sunday morning and you were waking up on a Monday morning thinking, oh dear, what am I dealing with here? So that, for me, again, it's about that flexibility and adaptability and just being able to go, right, what is the situation here? Having a plan. I mean, you can never plan for anything, but you can have the tools in place.
I mean, my old managing director used to say, I've never had a plan that went to plan, but you still need to have one. And being able to access the right people, have the right people sitting in front of you, again, really difficult to do remotely at this point in time. So that was a challenge for me. I think I had maybe gone into like a lot of the campaign and lobbying side of stuff, and it was really successful, some of the things I'd worked on. So it was quite nice and rosy. And I know in some of the organisations I worked in, actually, it was really easy to do that type of work because most people were on your side. I mean, working for Citizens Advice, there's not a lot of people who are going, sorry, what you do is awful, So that was great, and that was really good because you were sort of being the sidekick to people who were the heroes really in the story. But that changes, and that's completely changed in jobs I've moved on afterwards, where you're constantly being criticised, working in the public sector as well. I mean, you're so open to that. People go, well, you can hide because you're a civil servant, nobody knows. But I mean, there's a lot of pressure there from all sorts. I mean, there's pressure to get stories out there, but there's also pressure to make sure stories don't go out there as well. And a lot of that you don't see. And to me, if you don't see it, then you've done a good job as well. But
it's something that maybe I have maybe moved a wee bit away from now. I'm probably glad. I think I had a few sleepless nights doing that type of work.
I'd say you did.
It's high pressure and high intensity, and I think, as you were saying, sometimes for your own mental health and sanity, you have to say that's too much for one person to be dealing with all the time. And when you're dealing with people, I mean, you're thinking about the impact it has on them too. As an organisation, you worry about your reputation, but ultimately, if there's people involved in a story, that's number one priority, to make sure that that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're involved in a video project at the minute with an organisation who look after people who've been through some sort of mental health trauma, and they were very keen to get their students, they call them, to tell their stories, and we were acutely aware of the sensitivities around the stories. So we were having to say to people, listen, we're going to ask questions. If you're not comfortable answering the question, you are perfectly entitled to say, I'm not answering that.
No,
and we will not go places that you do not want us to go. It's not about, trying to create the sensationalist thing that's going to get the most views. This is about, this is human beings and the impact on their personal lives we're talking about here, and you have to be very, very sensitive to that.
And then in the other vein, I mean, working at Niagara, I was doing a lot of work around rehabilitation. So there were lots of people who had real life experiences of being in the criminal justice system who, really, it was really good to see that they turned their lives around. But there's also then an expectation that people want to hear their story too, and you have to be acutely aware that there are people who are impacted by the actions that they've taken as well. And again, there's something there about there being an awareness at a senior level of the impact of comms going well and also going wrong. And I think there's still a bit of work to do there in terms of particularly in the third sector where you're working on your own and you're probably not in the senior management level, to make sure that the senior teams are aware actually of the impact of what can go right and what can go wrong as well. And you're only one person, as you said, there's only so much you can do, and you have to be realistic there. That's probably another thing I would say 10 years ago, where I would have said, I'll do everything. And now I say, right, can we actually get this done? Is this realistic? And is it something that is worthwhile doing? Particularly with press and media, it always seems like a good idea at the time, but sometimes you don't need to be everywhere to make an impact.
Okay. You touched on the starting your own business endeavour. So is it 18 months or so you've been doing that now? So what's that been like? What's been being your own boss compared to working in-house or being employed by someone?
Well, I think my family and friends laugh at me. I was like, because I go, I got paid yesterday. And then and I said, I asked the boss and I got paid early. So, so I mean, it's we make a little bit of fun out of it. I love it. I have to say, I really enjoy it. I think my issue is, it's like you, Catherine, do I know what I want to do when I grow up yet? Do I want to do comms forever? No. After working for myself, I struggle to go and work full time for somebody again. Yes. So, there's the good and bad in it. I have to say, if I can do this job and do it with the lifestyle that I'm getting out of it for the next few years when my girls are still young. And I mean, I suppose for me, one of the things I say, one of the real perks of it is I get to drop them to school. For a couple of years there, when I started work at 8:30, they didn't know who I was at the school. And the kids maybe don't notice that so much, but I did. And I think just now that I can actually do that, and obviously, I rely on family and stuff for childcare, and I'd rarely lift them from school, but just that wee thing to know that I can and I can do that within my own time. And what I would say to people listening here is, I think we're all so acutely aware now of mental health and well-being, and what you always have to think, and sometimes, and I didn't realise that, is it's only a job. And please don't anybody ever let your job get beyond your life and your home life and your family. And because at the end of the day, the most important thing in the world is, family and friends. And yes, you want to earn a good salary, but if doing that in a really high pressured environment isn't right for you, just get yourself out of that situation. You can you can be much happier, maybe earning less money, if
Well,
that's the case.
it's funny. It's funny you mention that, because but before I left the world of employment, the setup of myself, you build this up to be this big Armageddon moment, where this is it. If this goes wrong, like this is the end, And it was only after about 6 or 8 months of that, holy shit, what am I doing here? That I actually realized, if this doesn't work, I think I'm still employable. So, well, other people may disagree, but if it doesn't work, I'll just go and get a job.
Yeah.
And when you actually, and it was when I got myself to that point that it was like, well, people were like, you're mad, the risk you're taking. And I was like, well, I'm not actually, worst case scenario, I burn a few savings, but I've got it out of my system. I proved myself wrong, and I go and get another job and accept it and move on. And it's not sitting there anymore bugging me. It's gone. Luckily enough, it has worked out so far. But it was getting yourself to that mindset. And I mean, I used to do an awful lot of traveling with some of the work, and I mean, I missed things with our eldest 2 kids that I shouldn't have missed.
Yeah.
But I did because I was consumed.
I think though we've talked about that we still don't know what we want to do, but I think we all know what we don't want to do now. And taking those risks are really important because, as you said, like, I mean, it could go wrong, but it could go right as well, and that's great. But for me, that would be something I would say. I mean, at the start of my career, I very much thought about, let's try a bit of everything, like try it all out, see what I like, see what I don't. And actually, some of the best lessons I learned were like, what I don't want to do, I absolutely don't want to do. The person I want to be, I think, like you're talking about your personal life. I mean, it's about your character as well, and the type of person you want to be in terms of who you're working with, be that colleagues or clients. Me now, I manage people, the type of manager I want to be. Like, I learned what type of manager I didn't want to be too. Yeah. And
well,
I think you need to try.
I was exactly the kind of manager that I would have hated to have. Because it goes back to your thing about people management, all the things they teach you at school and all the qualifications and stuff you do. Nobody ever teaches you how to manage people. And then I personally, the first job I went in to manage people, I was absolutely awful at it. Yeah. And you're just learning on the job. And I think everybody's the same.
And I think, people would have said to me, you're crazy setting up a business like at the start of a pandemic. And I was like, no, actually turn that right around, because if I can make a business work during a pandemic, then I'm home in a boat, really, because that was the most difficult time to set up. And I have to say, I suppose, without realising it, I had spent a huge amount of time and given quite a lot of time back to the local business community and that. So when the time came, I had the phone numbers of network. Quite a few people who just immediately were able to buoy me up and say, this is a good thing to do. One of them actually turned around and said, do you know what, if it doesn't work, I'll give you a job. And he says, put that in your back pocket and have that. And like instantly, that was my your 6 month moment. Instantly that was my going, do you know what, I actually have this. And I said, if this doesn't work, I know there's something else, because I wouldn't be a massive risk taker. I wouldn't be hugely inclined to do that. But I think the learning that I had, and particularly from agency, like straight away, and I'm not particularly, accountancy, or that wouldn't be my forte. But instantly, and I'll say this to people when I'm doing, or training them or that, now I'll turn around and say, I knew how much I needed to earn per hour, how much I needed to earn per day, per week, per month.
Know the numbers.
And knew the numbers, knew exactly how to work. How many clients does that equate into? How many clinic sessions does that? How many speaking opportunities does that equate into? And once I had that and had that sorted out, and then the clients started to come, now I'm turning around and saying, I'm able to turn around and say, I actually don't have time to do that, because I'm not overstretching myself. I keep those numbers in the back of my head, and I know where I'm at. But again, it's very hard to do that when you're 20 or 21. Some of that takes experience.
You mentioned the networking thing there. I mean, Katherine, you're a CIPR committee member as well. So obviously you see the value in that. Your personal network and professional network. But what is it about being involved in an organisation like CIPR that you find really valuable for your career?
I suppose for me, working in an environment where you're probably the only person in your organisation who does what you do, made me realise the importance of actually going out and networking with like-minded people. Again, another great person that I worked for told me, do you know what, go out and spend like a Friday morning meeting with all the other people who work in organisations like we do, doing what you do. And Northern Ireland's a really small place. I mean, once you go out and start working, you realise that you see a lot of the same people in the same places. And that probably was really helpful for you when you went out on your own as well, because that's critical. You have to be out there. Would I enjoy networking? No, it's not in my nature to do that. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have sat here and done this, because it would have been like my worst nightmare to speak in front of people. But I think it's something that you have to practice, but you also have to keep up with as well. For me, I joined CIPR as a member. Actually, back when I was a student, just saw the value in it, again, just in terms of learning and development, and meeting other people who are doing similar work. Now, I would say, for me, working in an organisation where there is a fairly sizable comms team, but comms isn't the main function of the organisation, is that it gives me a credibility that probably you mightn't get if you're not within a recognised industry body. And I think that's really important. I think we still struggle to get communications and PR around the table in terms of leadership. People are really interested in it when they need it, but actually it's not just about when it's needed all the time. It's not needed in a crisis just. And I think that's critically important. The other thing, I suppose, as well for me is just most of my career has been working with people, and very often people who are very vulnerable. And I think in terms of just the ethics of what I do, it's really important for me to be able to say that I work to a standard that, other people in the industry recognise as well.
Okay. I mean, you've been involved with, you were president in your chamber for a while, weren't you? Is it the same sort of thing for you? Is the reason why you engage with those sort of organisations?
Yeah, like that. CIPR, I did a diploma with it. Did the awards, involved in CIM member now as well. But the chamber has probably been my staple over the last 15 years. And again, when we talk about, probably been called it crazy a few times in my life, but I actually took on the presidency when I was expecting my first child, and people just went really, honestly. And I think, as far as we know, I think I was the youngest ever female president of a Chamber of Commerce. And I said, well, if I can't claim that, I can say I was the only pregnant one. So it was a really crazy time, because there was a judicial review and there was stuff going on, really, really meaty stuff to get involved in. But for me, it was unbelievable, because a lot of the people around the table were.
Did you have to wear the chain?
Yeah. But it was great. You didn't need jewellery for anything, for any event, because you had the bling. But for me, it was brilliant, because a lot of the people around the table, and they're still the same people, and they're fantastic. But it's a lot of your typical sort of men in suits. Yep. So I rocked in with a baby to the meetings, and was taking the meetings with, patting the baby over my shoulder. And the first one, there was a level of uncomfortableness, not an intentional uncomfortableness, but just not knowing where to go with it. But it turned out to be absolutely brilliant, because everybody loosened up to it and realised that she came to the meetings. And
is there an element that it's just unfamiliarity?
Yeah,
we've none of us have ever seen this happen before in a chamber meeting. So
and a bottle sitting on the table.
And eventually, you know what? Then this is the importance of the diversity and the inclusion piece. It's just we're as human beings, we're uncomfortable in environments that are seeing things that we're not used to seeing.
Yeah.
So the more we can see those things, the more comfortable we get with it. And it's like it's in the news this week, actually, isn't it? About the MP who brought her baby into the House of Commons and was told you can't bring that baby in here, and I was like, well, why not?
Yeah, why not? It's like I was going, it was my maternity leave, so I was like, I'm doing this in my own time as a voluntary thing when I'm supposed to be bonding with my baby. So my baby should be with me to actually. So like every photograph, the photographers used to just move the buggy a little tiny wee bit there, So she would be sitting here and I would be blinged up, in the photograph. But it just, if anybody's listening, just don't let anybody ever say, you can't or you shouldn't do these certain things, or there's no right time. Like as I said, you know, I was expecting my second child when I had just gone into that job, and while it put me on the back foot, would I ever change that? No, like absolutely under no circumstances. So, you know, don't let anybody tell you it's the wrong time to do something, or, you know, you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't take that, or you shouldn't, you're crazy to start your own business in a pandemic. You know, it's really important that people listening here, you know, if you're in the communications industry, the communications sector, you know, you can do all these things. You know, don't let anybody ever tell you can't do something.
It's a good line, yeah. Just leave it there. I'm a big fan of things like that.
Should have said it more profoundly.
No, but you're right. You can't.
That's an inspiration.
You can't be what you can't see. That's probably.
That's it.
And you don't realise that.
You're looking to try and get a better line than I did.
But no, you don't realise that there's probably people listening to this thinking, do you know what, I didn't think about that. And like, I mean, we could probably have a whole conversation about being female in the communications industry as well.
I'd have to duck out of that one.
But I mean, there are loads of things. I mean, some of the stuff you've brought up already, even this evening, and lots of organisations and places are really trying. And I do think you're right. It's a bit of like, people don't really know what to do or say, and it makes people feel a bit uncomfortable. But then that's for them to deal with too.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely, that's their problem. But
and also,
and we've got let's make them feel uncomfortable more.
And if you're in a place where you are made to feel uncomfortable, I mean, that's not the place that you should be. Then, I mean, you should be able to be yourself, and you should be able to express that. And actually, being a mother is part of you and what you bring to the table too. I think we were laughing about the £100 cards and the whole thing about the maiden name issue and women not being able to verify their identity. And I just thought, God, really, this tells you all about who was sitting around the table there. And that's critically important to me. And obviously in Northern Ireland we have huge issues around diversity, and I mean diversity in every sense of the word, be that, you know, ethnicity, gender, class, the whole heap.
I think it's brilliant what we're seeing at the minute with Kate Nicholl, actually, as
she's fabulous.
I mean, I saw she was up at the launch of the toboggan run thing up in Colin Glen yesterday, and was saying, you know, she wasn't going to go on it, and the reason was they didn't allow pregnant people on it. But at least that was her excuse, and she was sticking to it. But I think it's great that, but it's great. It's sort of a little bit sad at the same time that you're saying things like, it's great that she's being so open about being pregnant while being Lord Mayor. I mean, why should it shouldn't be an issue, but it obviously is. There's been a conscious decision. You know, I'm doing this,
and I think
I'm going to continue doing this.
There's still maybe organisationally and in terms of policy and legislation, there are lots of good things happening, but I still think culturally we still have a wee bit of a way to go. I also think probably being female in an industry that's female dominated is interesting, because I'm actually in an organisation that probably is still making strides to get there. But there's also a tendency to try and like label women much more than men, and I think you struggle with that too when when you're in your career. It's like, all right, she's that age, will she be having children? You know, it's like, come on, why are we still having this conversation? It's sad, but I think it would be naive to think that it doesn't still happen too. And I wouldn't say, you know, go in thinking everything's going to be great with rose tinted glasses, because you will still meet people who challenge who you are and, you know, the life that you lead, and that's important to be ready and prepared for that too, I think.
Well, we talk a little bit more about the experience in the housing executive. I remember when I first spoke to you about this, Katherine, I was absolutely amazed by how, you know, many customers, if you like, that you would have. Can you tell us something about the size of the body of people, if you like, that you're responsible for the comms for?
So my role in customer engagement and campaigns was new. So I had the joy of coming in and taking on that role and setting up a team then who looked after that. As an organisation, the Housing Executive has 85,000 properties, so about 170,000 tenants in total. Again,
that's some email list.
Lots of communication going on, but maybe not really thinking completely about who exactly that is. I mean, thinking about, I think lots of people think, oh, let's go down the digital route, that's really great. And I thought, well, right, okay. When I went in, there was this idea of we're going to transform everything and it's going to be great. And I said, who are these people? What do we know about them? How do they like to be communicated with? And actually I spent a lot of time working all that out before I did one piece of communications to anyone, and that was critically important. Still, in terms of the work that I do, the single biggest piece of work I do is actually a printed piece. And that's a shock for people in this day and age to think, oh, right, the printed thing's still going on. And there's very much a move to move away from that. And I says, look, the figures don't lie. Like, at the end of the day, this is what people want, and this is how people want to be communicated with. And also, people just aren't ready for that either. So whilst I'm a big advocate for doing things digitally and efficiently, I think you need to be really mindful of who you're speaking to and what you want to say. So my question still at this point in time is why? Because I would like a wee leaflet for this, or, you know, I was thinking about that, and I go, well, why are we doing it? What's the purpose? And it's moving from a culture of let's tick a box to, you know, let's do something really meaningful and thoughtful that will land with people, and that's what's really important.
With the channel first,
but big culture shock. I mean, huge organisation, 3,500 staff, the processes, the approval, everything was just a complete shock to me, but also a joy. I'm around a big team of people who can help, and that's great. You
sound like just a better human than I am.
I'm not really.
But I love it. It's actually lovely. It's actually lovely sitting around this table and looking at, you know, in-house and external, because anybody who's like done any training or anything with me, the first thing I say is why. Why are you doing this? You know, who is your customer? Know your customer, because your customer dictates the channels that you communicate through. And anybody listening to this, maybe starting out in their career, you know, I would just take that piece of advice, and it's looking and going, as always, question, what am I trying to achieve with this? What is my objective here? You know, because I think sometimes you can get so caught up in the doing.
I don't know about you, but I've never met, from when I graduated up to now, and talking to other people who own businesses or other people who are employed in businesses at my age, I've never heard anybody who is responsible for employing people who has ever said, oh, they ask too many questions. Yeah. You know, it's always, often it's the flip side of that is the reason for a bad outcome is, well, they're just not interested enough. Yeah. And maybe they are, but they just don't feel they can ask the questions. So just keep asking and delving deeper, and why and what's that about. And okay, so I laughed whatever you said about you kind of get a wee leaflet for this. The wee thing is a peculiarly Northern Irish one, but the sales guys in the engineering company that I used to, and it just shows you, no matter what sector you're in, no matter what job you're doing, the problems we're all facing, the things we're all doing are exactly the same. Yeah. Yeah. The sales guys one that used to come to me was, I just need a wee one pager. And you're like, what do you want on? How do you know it's a page? Yeah. Like, you know, before we start doing it, how do you know it's all going to fit on a page?
Or it's like people coming to you and saying, we need to be on TikTok. You know, everybody's on TikTok. Why? I'm like, why? Are your customers on TikTok? How do you know your customers on TikTok? Like, what research have you done to find?
This goes on to one of the points, and I'm conscious of time here. This is going to break records. This is the longest one we've done so far. But
everyone definitely will be asleep.
And this is a wee easy one for you. So for both of you, how has over the course of your careers, how has the growth of digital and the new comms channels changed the PR and comms role?
It's revolutionised, you know, where I started, when I started back in agency when I was 23 or 24, I mean, just digital, it just wasn't a thing. It just wasn't. It was, you wanted column inches, you wanted to be in the press, you wanted to be in the papers, and radio and TV was a bonus. And then obviously there was the stakeholder engagement side, but, you know, there was nobody checking reach or likes or impressions, or, you know, it just wasn't a thing. So it's the part of what you're saying about the lifelong learning. I mean, if you didn't move on with that, you become irrelevant. But it's also then again, as you talk about, I actually met with an editor of one of the local papers today, and I was saying, you know, I still am a big advocate for local press, because people love to be in the paper. Because they talk about, it's this idea of the tangibility of being on Facebook. It's just not.
I tell you what happened. This has happened to me yesterday. I was asked by the IOD in was it last June, said, do you want to write an article for the September-October edition of the IOD Director magazine? Yeah. So I said, okay. So I put an article together on, you know, how you could be better at video, funnily enough, and it was about 500 words. And then I got an email yesterday from Alicia at the IOD here saying, do you want to write an article for the February-March issue? And I'd forgotten about it because I'd sent the one back, and I was like, I never saw the September-October one. So I immediately went into panic mode, and I was like hunting through the shelves to try and find the old copies of it, and couldn't find it. And then I was like emailing the IOD saying, can you email me a PDF, please, of the magazine? And it was, Alicia managed to send me a PDF of the 2-page article, but it just wasn't the same.
No.
As you know,
has been able to leaf through it.
Turning the page and going, oh, look.
Like we have at home what we call like a little family box, and my husband and I both run. So like, if we're in the paper for running, or if we're in the paper for anything to do with work, which is regular with both of us, we cut out the clippings and put them into the family box. You just can't do that. You could have 100,000 views of what you're doing on
folder
social
on Google
media.
Drive.
Yeah, but you just can't. You just can't do that. And there's just something that, and I always say that a good CEO or MD keeps up to date with what's happening in their local area. So the chances are they'll leaf through the local papers and get a sense of what's going on. So I think it's this idea of being omni-channel. And knowing your audience, like if you're purely trying to reach under 25s, you're not going to go to the press, because unless for sport, as we say, sport is a huge thing in the papers, and again, people will cut out photographs themselves, or schools, that very young audience. But it's this idea of, sometimes people would say to me, oh, I'm the digital comms manager, and I'm like, no, please just spread yourself out. Just make sure that you have a good understanding of, a broader understanding of where that fits in the whole world of comms. And I actually put communications over as the overarching banner for everything under, marketing, PR, videography, all that to me, stakeholder engagement, public affairs, all sit under this banner of communications. So, everything has its place and time and space, but it's just making sure that, again, it should come back to the why and who is your audience. I mean,
back to you, I suppose, Katherine, on that one as well. Then, I mean, my thought, having never been involved in particularly the charitable organisations, is that digital's created massive opportunities in terms of ability to now go and reach people directly without, it's not about paying for exposure anymore, and there's a massive opportunity there. But are there any other ways you've seen that the digital PR or digital change the world of PR and comms over the course of your career?
I think, just not to repeat what you've said, I'll try to move over to a different slant. I think it's allowed people to have a two-way conversation that was never had before. And I find that actually I get a lot of insight out of those interactions, which is really great. I think it's really important not to put digital also under one umbrella, because there's so much to that's different, and you can caveat that even further down. People will be like, like you said, let's be on TikTok, and you're like, well, why would the housing executive be on TikTok? It just doesn't make sense. But
I'd love to see that.
But it's also just this thought of, we have to be doing everything. You don't. You have to do what suits your audience, your customer, your organisation as well. And I think that's absolutely critical. Digital is great, but it's one of many. I think it's one piece of the puzzle. I also think, just even looking at how people view information, we have so much information now, and that's partly down to 24-hour news and the digital sphere, that it makes it even harder to communicate with people. Sometimes it's not easy anymore because there's so much noise that it's like, how do I be heard within this noise? And that is massive. And I don't think people truly understand how that works yet. I also just think a lot of people, I mean, I know myself, I shouldn't say this, being somebody who works in communications and PR, but I turn a lot of my apps off. I think people now have gone from, and I'd say I was probably of an age where I had a foot in and a foot out. I was an adult when social media came about. I was really young, I was at university, and it was just this thing. I think for about 10 years there, it became people's lives almost, and it took over. And I think now, maybe just because of the circumstances of what's happening globally, that yes, it's absolutely amazing to be able to connect people all the time, but we aren't moving fast enough to be able to keep up with that speed of information as well. So I do think there's nearly some sort of switch the other way in some instances where people are like, I want to lift the local newspaper and see who's in the photo section. And that's actually sometimes where you get your best coverage and your best value. And in an organisation like the Housing Executive, that's still a really critical channel for us as well. Yeah,
it's interesting. As I said, my son's over at Manchester University. He started in first year, and I remember I shared something with him on Facebook, I think, about a band, about a concert or something I was thinking of going to, about a month or so after he went. And I remember saying to him a few days later, did you see
He's not on
the
it.
thing? And he was on Facebook and Instagram, but he said that he's on a card around the halls with 30 of them, and he says 20 of them deleted both the apps. Whenever they started, they just decided it wasn't good for them to be on them anymore, and they just deleted them. And this isn't a scientific survey. This is 30 people at one university in a corridor in Manchester. But it was really interesting for me to hear that is happening. He's 19, and he just decided, I don't want to be on these channels anymore because they're not good for me.
I think we're so far behind that we assume that all young people also are on digital, and that experience just shows you that maybe that's not the way to do it. I also think, and obviously just given what has happened in the last 18 months, we haven't been able to see people face to face, but there's nothing quite like just meeting people.
But do you not find if the channel selection thing is an absolute nightmare? I know even in our family, I know if I want to get a response from my son, it's by text. If I want to get a response from my daughter, it's WhatsApp. If I want to get a response from my wife, it's Facebook Messenger. So you're having to think about all these things.
I also had conversations with the same person on 2 different channels at the one time. That's not good. Do you know what I mean?
For us, I think we've changed a little bit as a family with WhatsApp, because previously you maybe posted things on Facebook and that so that the family could see them. But if you've got our family group is called the King Kongs. You know what I mean? Whenever it's in the King Kongs group, it's gospel. So it doesn't need to go. Anywhere else. I don't need anybody else to see the pictures of the kids, on their first day of school or whatever, because it's not for global consumption. So I found even what I post on personally on social media has just reduced. Has reduced down. Obviously with the business, I made the conscious decision to go at LinkedIn only, because I was like, that's my why, that's where my audience is. So why would I advise other people to to find out where your customers are and try to be on every channel myself, so
okay, I'm very conscious of time, so one last question for you both, and it might well recap on something that you've already said, but if you had to give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would it be? Who wants to start?
Can we go for it?
For me, it would probably be, I think a huge thing for young people is confidence. I just think the whole well-being and mental health thing and all comes down to confidence. Just this comfortableness in your own skin. And this ability, you don't have to be the very best. You don't have to, you don't have to excel at everything. You'll have the companies which, it's not your fault, it's not their fault. You're just maybe not the right fit for them at that particular time. You'll have the boyfriends, the girlfriends, the gender neutral people who are exactly the same. They're not right for you. And I was at an event one time, and the lady said, and I've taken this away, and I was just like, this is brilliant. And I instill this in my girls who are 5 and 7. You are just not everybody's cup of tea. And if we all were, we'd be very boring, but you're just not everybody's cup of tea.
I was talking to a friend of mine, we were going down to Dublin on Tuesday, and he was saying they were reading Michelle Obama's book, and he's got 2 daughters who are 4 and 6, and he said they both say this now, and it was in Michelle Obama's book, and apparently Michelle says to them, were you born smart? And they both answer, no, I was born beautiful, but I learned to be smart.
Very good, very good. Confidence and acceptance that you're not everybody's cup of tea.
And what about you, Catherine?
I think for me, it's that it's okay to fail, or it's okay for things to go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's good, actually.
I think I'm so guilty of it, that everything has to be totally perfect, and actually it doesn't. Sometimes it just has to be done, and that's really important. I think we've talked about, in your head you have a plan, and then the plan doesn't go according to plan, but the only person who knew the plan was you. So no one really sees the gravity of where it went wrong or where it went off track. And probably some of the best lessons I learned were when things went wrong and I sat down and went, right, I'll, one, not do that again, and two, how can I do that differently? So I wouldn't be frightened of failure. I don't see it as failure. I just see it as an opportunity to sit down and think, how can I do that differently or better next time?
Yeah. I had a great teacher at school, an English teacher called Mr. Hamill. He's no longer with us. But he used to manage the school. He used to take us on the school ski trips. And one piece of advice that I've just taken forward into my working life, and he never even said it as a piece of working advice. It was actually advice when we were going out skiing every morning, and he used to stand at the door of the breakfast room, and as everybody walked out the door, he used to say, right, before you go, just remember, if you don't fall, you're not trying hard enough.
I thought you were going to say never eat yellow snow.
No, that is also good advice. and on that note, we will call the night. So thank you very much, Catherine and Deborah, for coming on. I hope everybody found that one interesting. That is the end of the penultimate episode of our live series for 2021. We have one more left on the 16th of December for anybody who hasn't got anything better to do that close to Christmas. And we're talking freelancing. We've got one guest confirmed for that for a minute, who is Francesca Morelli, who is the founder of Vava Influence, which is an influencer marketing agency based here in Belfast. And she also works with Queen's in their employability and enterprise department, I think, for students too. So we'll be talking to Francesca about her decision to set up the agency immediately after she graduated and what she's learned over the course of the time since she's done that. Thank you very much again, Catherine and Deborah. Thanks to everybody who joined us tonight, and we shall see you again on the 16th of December.